Womontown too.
We really just wanted to live in a neighborhood where we were accepted.
What if we created a vision, and the vision turned into what we know today and what we saw develop over the years, Womontown.
Map to Dyke City, here it is.
So this is the house, bought in the 70s. I was a radical out dyke. And I was determined to quit paying rent. And I thought, why not live here? I was, brave, I thought, and naive. Then I got with my partner, Mary Ann Hopper, and we've been together like 34 years and 36 years, lose time. But what was cool about it was she came from the suburbs. I was an inner city gal. And she looked around and said, this is scary. And it was friggin' scary.
So we would be sitting out, on the porch, and people would drive by and maybe heckle us, gunshots we heard in the distance and stuff. Andrea's sitting there going, yeah, and I'm going to fix up this house, and it's going to be so beautiful. And I'm thinking, and why do I want to live in this beautiful house with all these people being so mean around us and whatever? So I really broke down. It was like, I don't think I can live here, unless we really make some changes. So then we just started imagining, what if we could just walk hand in hand freely down the streets, a bunch of lesbians all in this neighborhood? And I thought, well, if we can do the work, I could imagine that it would maybe be fun to live here. So that's when we really started saying, well, let's see if we can get people to move here. Lesbians in the 70s and 80s were still a very threatened class. And we only had a few gathering places. They were just kind of word of mouth places. Nothing was out, nothing was open. Even where we lived, we somehow had to be, when you went to rent, you don't say, hi, I'm moving in with my girlfriend or my partner or whatever. So you kind of had to be covert about everything because of harassment.
Well, it is true. When my kids were a little younger and I lived in other neighborhoods that were all straight, I definitely didn't go up and down the street and announce that I was gay because I was fearful they might try to take my kids away.
At that time, of course, it was rarer for someone who was gay or lesbian to intermix very well with the straight population. So there were a lot of gay bars and women events because it was newly forming our own community where we could feel comfortable.
Because we all have a life before that we remember what it was like if it was high school, if it was college, if it was whatever, family reunion, whatever part of your life you remember. Nobody really cared about asking you what was going on in your life.
Once they suspect or know that you're lesbian, they don't ask you too many personal questions. Like, what did you do this weekend? No, they don't really want to know because you might have been having sex and you might say that.
In most cities, if you drive through with another woman, they'll go, oh, a lot of lesbians live here, and a few gay guys live there, but it was down this street and over there and maybe an apartment building. It was just a basic area. And I think the idea that we would be within a few blocks of each other and it was a concentrated thing, I think that was something very attractive that they hadn't thought of.
I have this feel about, we're trying to create a conscious community in a community already. Because so many of the conscious communities at that time were created out like on a farm or in a rural area.
And there were a number of land co-ops all over the country, but that was a different kind of lifestyle.
I'm not a rural person, ain't walking with the chickens and the ducks. I am a city gal. I want the theaters and the activities.
We definitely saw a reason to have it in a city because there was jobs available, homes already built. And so there was a lot of reason to have it in the community.
That was attractive to folks who wanted to live in the city and wanted to be out and wanted to have a lesbian community as a support, because a lot of people's families were not supportive of their lifestyle. So they didn't have family really, and we were creating a family.
I was kind of in on the beginning of it with Marianne and Andrea. They were good friends of mine from the mid-'80s. My then partner, Peggy, and I went to the same National Women's Music Festival with them, and we attended a lecture by a woman by the name of Sonia Johnson. And she was talking about forming conscious women's community basically to get away from patriarchy.
Going to festivals and gatherings that were all underground back then, you got that feeling for 3 or 4 days of what it would be like for women to create their own community, their own festival, to be in charge of everything. Like the music festivals, they were the musicians, they built the stages, they did the crews. Women were empowered. Women were powerful and could create every aspect of their own life, and they didn't need anybody from the outside judging them or saying that women like you are not worthy or can't create anything. So we just started thinking about what would be attractive about the neighborhood, and of course it was economics. For a lot of lesbians, cheaper rent or even the ability to buy a house for $15,000, $17,000, $20,000, a 3-story shirtwaist house, was pretty amazing.
We would say to them, this is a community, buy a house. You hear me say it today, buy a house. You have your own safe space. You get to determine who you are. You invite who you want in. And economically, you make yourself secure for in the future when rent goes from $250 to $1,200 to $2,500. You will be at this because you own it.
We knew Andrea and Marianne, and they had been trying to talk us into buying a house. And we said, well, we got to have this, 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 and this. They says, well, there's a house down close to us that is empty, that has been 90% rehabbed. Go take a look at it. We took a look at it and bought it.
We kind of got started with Kansas City area women's gathering group, which was a potluck group we had once a month.
Well, of course, they had a meeting first where they gave the information. And of course, lesbians, it was a potluck. And so we went and we got the information, and Beverly right away was, I'm going to move in there. I'm going to get a house soon. I was like, oh, Bev, let's think about it. It's 1 block off of Troost, and it was real gang infested and drug infested at that time. And back in the 90s, it was pretty rough. But she said, Sue, we can do it. This is the only time we can afford a house. Let's do it. And she was the first African-American woman. She's a pioneer to buy a house in Womontown. I was with Bev for 25 years. COVID took her, and she was an entrepreneur. She was fun, and she was always willing to try a new adventure, and that was it.
Hi, Bev. Hi. I'm doing great. Hey.
I knew other women that lived in Womontown or had lived around there. I thought it was a wonderful idea. I was living with a woman at that time that also felt that way, and we decided we would like to go there.
When I met Cheryl and she told me about the Womontown, I was just, I want to be here. This is it. There wasn't even a question. And even the place I lived in was a dump, really. And I still, loved it. because of the community.
This was the apartment building, 2820 Harrison, that we bought. And the reason we bought this one first was the people that owned it, they were slum landlords, and they just put anybody in. And we got tired of, the beer bottles being thrown over at us, telling us what they're going to do to us if they ever got a chance to get inside our fence. And our dogs would just go crazy, and they would urinate on them. And I'd come outside, sit on that little porch that I had. I'd come outside and I'd say, "Get them!" There was like, "Get them!"
The guys that owned the building were apparently ready to sell it. Drea approached him, I think, and said, "Do you want to sell it?" And yeah, you take it, So we were very happy to be able to clear that out. And we said, okay, now we'll have a place for the women to come right off, and they could rent from us. So we could have a reasonable rent. I think rent back then was about $200, $250 for a nice 2-bedroom apartment.
Then when Mary Ann and Drea had a vacancy, they took me to lunch one day and they said, "What would it take for you to move?" And I said, "A dishwasher." And they said, "Welcome to the building." They're kind of like my moms. I was just coming out and, kind of making feelers in a new, strange world.
Just the idea of being with a group of women, just having all that female energy. It was just very life-affirming.
So I thought, I'll put an ad in Lesbian Connection and figure out a way to contact the women, because we had no internet then.
One day we got the Lesbian Connection magazine in the mail, and here's this little blurb in there about a deliberate urban lesbian community coming together in Kansas City, Missouri. So we made a call. I think we talked to Mary Ann and Andrea, and they said, "Oh, come on. Just come. You stay at our house. When do you want to come?" We flew to Kansas City, and they had planned a potluck and another party in the evening. We walked through the neighborhood. They pulled in the friendly neighborhood realtor who showed us what was available and what things cost. Looked at a few houses, and we were just awestruck because things were so cheap. And we decided, yep, let's move to Kansas City. But we better make one more trip to be sure. So we made another trip over Easter, and it was gorgeous. The tulips were out, and there were yard parties, and it was just fabulous. So then the realtor, she showed us several homes, and she showed us this big house at the corner of 28th and Charlotte. They called it a mini mansion. They were asking $104,000. And we, what? No. We sold our little 3-bedroom, 2-bath tract home in California for like $185,000. We offered $100,000 in cash, and they took it.
And so Drea, who can be kind of ornery at times, said, "Let's go over and meet Barbara and Karen." And so it was summer, so I was in a T-shirt and no bra. So, and everybody else were in T-shirts and no bras. So we knocked on their door. They opened the door, and we all flashed them. And I think they were kind of like, "Oh, what have we gotten ourselves into?"
When I moved in 93, a lot of lesbians were moving in.
People flew in from all over the country, from New York, from California, from the South, and Wisconsin.
Moving in from different parts of Kansas City, too, and different parts of Missouri.
We had a song called "The Dykes Come Marching 2 by 2, and then there was 4 of you. And before you knew, we all knew each other.
And just after corresponding with them a few times, and they're saying, okay, we're really going to come, was very exciting.
One couple that came there, they painted the fire hydrant in front of their apartment building purple. And then somebody else painted a fire hydrant purple. And that kind of got some of the neighbors up in arms, because they saw this as our first move to take over the neighborhood.
Some of the residents who had been there long term that had families, they had this misconception that we would turn their children to be, lesbians or gay. It's like, no, we don't want to have really anything to do with your kids, necessarily. We like your kids, they're fine, but we don't have any intention to turn them into anything.
Straight people sometimes have a hard time figuring out how to behave when they're completely surrounded by lesbians.
Oh, and the rumor went around, that we were separatists. We were separatists. And to me, I never thought that word was so bad until I started hearing it from these gay men who said we were separatists in the neighborhood. Like, so what? We got this little tiny piece of the world, and we don't like to be around men too much.
If I said this house sold for $30,000, I wanted a lesbian to buy it because we had no money. Because once the guys came in, what did they do? This is what they did. They bought it. Dale bought it. We loved Dale. We'd have parties over on my porch over there. But Dale he was a nurse. He could put 150 in it. He could sit. He's also male. He had a different safety about him. And I knew that. So I didn't didn't discourage the gay men, but I didn't promote the gay men, because to promote them was to set us aside.
We're lesbians. We're lesbians. We don't like men, but no, we had no problem with men. We just didn't want them running our lives,
We weren't an exclusive community in that anybody could buy a house there, obviously. And there were people who owned houses before we moved in who stayed there. But that by that concerted effort to get women to buy houses, we formed a nice community, a nice social community.
I remember hanging the Dutch Hill flags. That was the lesbian tulip flags that we used to identify each other by our houses, because the only way you got a flag was we had to give it to you when you moved in. So I'd say, hang it so we can recognize where you're living all over this 12-block radius. And these apartment buildings, there's 15 in one, 6 in the next, and 3. They were owned by Don Ricketts, and his son owned the smaller one, Dennis. And they were my very first allies for creating the landlord tenants association here. The other thing that Don Ricketts helped me do was we did the tulips throughout the neighborhood. And I will tell you, Don dug into the deepness of his pockets. He ordered boxes of tulips and brought them, and we just had to get them planted. And we planted in front of any house we could plant that was willing, all up and down Harrison Street, and it tied into Dutch Hill, the women. Of course, we played because we were dykes, dykes, tulips, all of that. But it also was okay for the straight world or the people that lived there, because it was still flowers. It was still Dutch Hill. The ones who were allies, the people, the lesbians, the gay men, the trans, those that were supportive of us, they were all in. Those who were not, they were vicious. As hard as we would try to build community, we always had that, element.
Promoting Womontown, going to different festivals to talk about it, keeping up with all the paperwork involved, and really it was a full-time second job. And so every weekend was pretty much dedicated in between Mom and Dad, Andrea's grandmother, who was also ill in Illinois, and a lot of the neighborhood association meetings, working also with the landlords, and then the city programs and organizing activities on the weekend. There was just a lot of work all the time. And I think after 5 years, things were working. And really, we kept all the property here. So it was like, we need a break from this, from the constant, everyday. A lot of people are here now. They can keep it rolling. I mean, there were over 80 or a lot of women were here during that period of time.
So I kept trying to keep things going Other people were involved too, not just me, except the work of the community wasn't getting done by anybody much but me. Probably the end of '94 or so, I just felt like I was driving the bus and it got real quiet. And then suddenly I turned around and there was nobody on the bus. The main lesson I've told other people is all lesbians are not alike. I think that was like one of my preconceived ideas, that we would meet up and live with other women who were just like us. It was so not true. There's all kinds.
There were several ups and there were several downs, but that's life, and that was lived in Womontown, and it was a wonderful place to be.
I just miss seeing women I really enjoyed being around. You know, I could walk down in the neighborhood and during the summer and people would be out. I'd wave to them and, you know, have a talk with them.
We always hosted the best parties, Bev and I, the potlucks, because Bev was an incredible cook. Martha and Sarah, they'd bring their instruments, and we had street festivals.
The get-togethers, that's, to me, it was the fun part.
Going out to Lewisburg cider mill together, looking for pumpkins, sitting around a big picnic table, eating apple cider donuts, and just laughing and having a good time.
You could always call somebody and say, hey, do you have this tool, or do you have that tool, or can you help me with that? I have to move some furniture. And there was always at that time, or over the years, someone that you could call and they would be there.
Just the camaraderie and the friendship and hanging out on Drea and Mary Ann's porch.
My mom came out on the porch and she said, I'm not Lebanese. She wanted to make sure everybody on the porch knew she wasn't Lebanese.
When we would go to the festivals for 3 days and we all knew this or whatever, we also knew that when we came back to Womontown, guess what? It was there, you know, from the porch.
The potlucks, the community was so important because we weren't assimilated as well as people are today. So that's the plus and the minus behind that assimilation in a way, that sometimes you don't have that community like you used to. We were almost forced into being able to feel comfortable, find ourselves, find one another, and that's how we did it.
You bought it, you developed it, you nurtured it, you won. That's what I wanted for every woman, for every dyke, for every alternative person that came in that neighborhood who financially struggled, who financially had been set aside by society, who emotionally had been discarded as not better, lesser than to even live in a neighborhood, in a home that you own. So, emotional. We were not supposed to be able to have any power. We as women were always to be the victim, the ones you used up and set aside. And then they would come in and rescue us like the knights on white horses, but then they push us out. This was a different, intentional neighborhood. We were so determined not to let them win that when we came up against things like the developers or the tax people or the politicians or the straight neighborhood association, we did not let them deter us. But that period of time from when it started to when we left in '93, what a vision. of all the women who are associated with Womontown who have left us, like the Donnavies and the TJ.
And Beverly.
And Bev.
Beverly
And Jean Green, and Bev Powell.
Beverly Powell.
And Eggleston.
And Eve Eggleston. And so many wonderful,
TJ.
wonderful women
TJ.
that we had the pleasure and honor of knowing in our lifetime.
Do not hear.
And I hope,
Let's
I
melt
hope
to the
all of
lid.
you have many more.
Olga.
Olga. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of people already.
And Darcy, I think somebody
Darcy.
said.
Darcy,
No,
No,
don't kill off Darcy.
Sorry,
She's
I
not
mean to kill me.
she just moved away.
If you move away, you're dead to us. Never mind, it was my fault.
Martha, do you got a couple
I
lines
would
of a
love
song
to
that we can
sing.
sing?
Oh,
Like a ship in the harbor, like a mother and child, like a light in the dark.